So here we go. Hello, everyone. This is Chase Allis. I'm part of ACRL staff, and I wanted to thank you all for joining us for the ACRL Presents webcast celebrating Open Access Week, Scaling Open to Fit Local Needs. Before we get started, I want to share just a few notes and reminders. The first reminder is that today's session is being recorded, and we will share the recording link with everyone who registered shortly after the webcast concludes. It will also be available on ACRL's website and our YouTube channel. Second, if you have questions during the event, please feel free to put them in the chat. The moderators will be collecting questions and sharing them with the panel, and you can open the chat box by clicking the chat icon at the bottom of the screen. And finally, this free webcast and ACRL's other professional development opportunities are made possible by your ACRL membership, which helps fund many of our programs and services for the academic and research library community. If you're not a member, you can join nearly 9,000 of your colleagues and become a member today. Visit ala.org/ACRL/membership for more information. Today, we are excited to hear from editors and authors of ACRL's new publication, the Scholarly Communications Cookbook, which is now available through the ALA store, and I'm pleased to introduce our moderators for this session, Emily Bongiovanni and Brianna Bulyoung, both from the Colorado School of Mines. Emily is the Scholarly Communications Librarian, and Brianna is the Teaching and Learning Librarian, and they are the co-editors of the Scholarly Communications Cookbook. Thank you again for joining us, everybody. Emily and Brianna, whenever you're ready, take it away.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Chase. Yes, welcome everyone. Looks like we've got people from all over the country and other countries as well. So thank you so much for attending. I'll go ahead and share my screen. Just thumbs up for my moderators if it all looks good, or for my panelists, because that's the only people I can see. Hi, I'm Emily Bongiovanni. I'm at the Scholarly Communications Librarian at Mines, here with Brianna Bulyoung, and many of our authors in the upcoming, or I guess just recently published ACRL Scholarly Communications Cookbook. Feels very nice to finally say published instead of upcoming. It's been a long work in progress, but we made it. I'd like to go ahead and introduce our panelists, and then we'll open up the discussion. First, we have Brittany Dudek. Brittany is joining from the Colorado Community College system, where she's the OER subject matter expert and advocate. She's the manager of the OER and library for the whole system, the community colleges online. Brittany has been instrumental in the collaborative efforts leading to more than 90 zero textbook courses, or ZTC courses, and 4 Z degree pathways. Brittany has served on the Colorado Department of Higher Education's OER Council, CCCO's OER Executive Council, and the ACRL CJCLS section for OER, the OER Task Force, and the Doers Equity Group. And she was the 2019-2020 Open Education Group OER Research Fellow. Next, we have Mahrya Burnett, and she's the Scholarly Communications Librarian at the University of Iowa's Libraries in the Scholarly Impact Department. She works on open access and open education initiatives, in addition to providing scholarly publishing and copyright support. Mahrya received her BA from Beloit College and her MLIS from the University of Washington, and has worked in academic libraries for 12 years. She is an active member of the Iowa OER Action Team, the Open Education Network, and the Iowa Library Association through ACRL, and chairs the library's scholarly publishing team. Next, we have CJ Ivory. CJ is the assistant professor and librarian, at the University of West Georgia, where she teaches information, literacy, and research. She serves as a campus liaison for Affordable Learning Georgia, a statewide initiative to support the implementation of open education resources and textbook alternatives. In addition, she has been awarded 2 grants to develop open learning materials for courses in chemistry and teacher education. Professor Ivory also has a forthcoming manuscript with ACRL Press titled Using Open Educational Resources to Promote Social Justice. She holds a Bachelor's of Arts in Economics from the University of Central Florida and an MLIS from Florida State University. Her research interests includes information literacy instruction, social justice education, and open pedagogy. And finally, we have Jenelys Cox. Jenelys is the Institutional Repository Manager for the University of Denver's University Libraries. She collects, archives, and showcases faculty and student scholarship. Her work includes supporting the research lifecycle, consulting on copyright and licensing, facilitating the publishing process for open access faculty and student journals, and maintaining data on university publications. Her areas of interest include scholarly communications, open access, OER, metadata and resource description, equity and access to information, and usability. So these are 4 of our authors for the Scholarly Communications Cookbook. All of them have initiatives related to open access and OER from a wide, diverse, array of institutions and institutions with different needs, different staffing, and community needs. If you have any questions about the book, please feel free to direct them to myself and to Brianna. But without further ado, we'll get started with our panel discussion. So I'm going to stop my share. And hand it over to Brianna to get started chatting with our panelists.
Okay, thank you. We have several questions prepared for our panelists today. If you have a specific question for a specific panelist, please be sure to use their name in the chat, and Emily and I will be monitoring the chat throughout. So our very first question is for all our panelists, and it's: tell us a little bit about the OA or OER program at your institution and how you right-sized it for your specific population. And I'll let whoever would like to get started take it away.
All righty, I will go ahead and get us going then. So I am at the University of Denver, and our population, we're at a private university. We are a fairly small to mid-sized school, about 10,000 FTE enrollment. We have a slightly unusual population in that we are about half graduate students, slightly more than half graduate students, and the rest undergraduate. We had, I would say, a number of efforts that I wouldn't necessarily call a program, but more like a series of interconnected initiatives, which have taken place over a fairly long amount of time. So we've been working to make our open access and open education resources more visible through our library catalog, through our institutional repository as well. We've done OER outreach for our faculty. We've been working with faculty on making their online presence more consistent and concise, and working with our collection development department, of which I am a part, to make more open resources available to our community, but also to invest in initiatives that will make OA available to larger groups that we don't necessarily own the content, right? And this year we're also starting a pilot APC fund for our faculty. In and amongst these projects, we've come to realize that there's a lot of confusion around open access and open education resources. So we wanted to start a program that would help us educate our population on what is this stuff. To that end, we started by investigating what our folks knew and what our folks didn't know. And we found out that a lot of them, even if they were knowledgeable, they didn't know the terminology, they didn't really understand the legal jargon, because who does? And so we put together a series of workshops to hopefully allow our people to get more familiar with this, understand how it affected them, and answer some of their questions. What is open access? What is OER? Why does it matter to me? How does it work with regular publishing? And what about my work and my copyright? So in trying to scale that to our institution, we did an iterative process. We started with a teeny tiny program where I think we had about 5 people in total show up, and realized, okay, this is working. This is something that people are actually interested in, but it's something that we need to figure out how to tailor it to them. So then we tried, well, let's go with some of our administration. We did a really huge thing that we had several hundred people for and realized, okay, that's great. We're reaching a lot of people, but there's like 2 of us and we can't really resource it. So in that iteration, we've discovered that we can normalize towards the middle, but also we've discovered that there's not really a one-size-fits-all solution. We don't need to reach our entire campus all the time with everything. We need to make sure that we're reaching our specific goal population with the specific information that they need. If I'm talking to a professor, it's different than talking to a student. So we're tailoring it to them and tailoring our scaling to them. If I have 2 people, it can be just as effective as 200 people, depending on my goals. So I will leave it at that for now.
I can go next. So my name is Mahrya Burnett, and I am the Scholarly Communications Librarian at University of Iowa, and we're a public research university in R1. And our chapter in the Scholarly Communications Cookbook was called Stocking the OA Pantry, Assessing a University's Open Access Infrastructure. And so this was sort of an assessment project, but it had some other kind of components as well. So basically, we sort of wanted to focus on how we're currently supporting open access at University of Iowa libraries, what kinds of OA efforts we want to support, and how selectors and other decision makers can kind of have some guidance for how to go about selecting OA infrastructure that really aligns with our values and with our goals as a library. So, we wanted to take a comprehensive inventory of how we were currently supporting open access. And this was about 2 years ago that this project started. And it might seem kind of, to a smaller library. I know libraries that I've worked in the past, it would be evident, like just by looking at the budget, like how you're supporting OA. But for an institution of this size, with multiple branches and multiple budgets and lines of funding and things like that, it was actually pretty difficult to get a full picture of what we were currently spending our money on. So that was kind of the main piece, was to take the inventory and then to categorize our support into different types of OA support. So we had like locally published journals, the infrastructure for that, OA journal support, OA monograph support, advocacy, read and publish agreements. And so those were kind of the main categories that we sorted our inventory into. And then we are currently just maintaining it and adding anything new that we're purchasing or supporting in some other way. So the other 2 pieces of that were to, after our inventory, was to sort of create a statement and sort of articulate what our values were in alignment with the library's strategic plan. And we sort of tried to map out some general areas that we were currently supporting and would like to sort of expand into. And we made this public statement, available on our webpage. This was meant for faculty and grad students primarily, but really for anyone who'd be using our libraries. So they sort of know sort of the philosophical underpinnings of our OA support and sort of practically what we're doing. And then finally, we developed a workflow and selection criteria document for selectors and other people who are making the decisions about whether or not to support a particular piece of OA infrastructure, certain things they might want to look for within all of the other categories that I described before. So the scoping and size issue is really sort of a driving factor in our effort. So, this all began a couple of years back because we had an open access fund which supported article processing fees for people publishing in open access journals, but we decided to sunset that fund largely because it wasn't fiscally viable for us really anymore. We were spending a lot of money supporting open access fees for the same publishers that we were also paying a lot of money to for subscriptions. And so our library leadership decided to kind of nix that fund. And so our scholarly publishing team, which is the group that was sort of behind this effort, we decided we really needed to kind of better understand exactly how we are still supporting open access in light of the sunsetting, and whether or not we were sort of meeting what our library's commitment to open access infrastructure should be. And so we were kind of roughly looking at a 2.5% budgetary commitment, sort of in alignment with David Lewis's paper from a few years back. I don't know that we've met that goal. We're still sort of trying to determine exactly, what should count towards this figure and what shouldn't and things like that. But our system is a large one involving lots of different people. And so this really had to be sort of a large scale project. And yeah, that's kind of what we needed to do because we already sort of had small understandings by department and resource type and things about what we were supporting, but we wanted to get a more full comprehensive picture.
So I'll go next. On the other end of that spectrum, my project was really small scale. And when I think about right sizing, I will say instead of necessarily focusing on my population, I had to focus on the resources that are available. So it was right sized and scaled for me. I'm one of the only people on my campus that are like hyper focused on open education resources. And I kind of stumbled into that position. It's not my primary focus. But I am very passionate about it. And I realized that if I wanted to have more significant impact on my campus, I obviously could not do it as a one-woman team, guerrilla warfare style. So I started kind of recruiting different folks to help evangelize in a way and train other people on how to approach the adoption of open education resources across campus. And so my first partnership was kind of serendipitous. As part of my one job responsibilities is being a liaison to Affordable Learning Georgia, which is how I really got deeply invested in this work. And realizing that we were not making the most use out of the resources that the state was providing on our campus. They provide statewide or state-funded grants to faculty who are looking to adopt, because a lot of times when faculty are thinking about adopting, time and resources is one of the big hurdles in the way. And so we had our sister institutions that are kind of head and shoulders above us, and were making significant gains with the grant funds that were being awarded. So that's kind of how I started working with the Office of Research and Sponsored Projects, because that's their goal, right? To increase research activities on campus. And it does go towards, the grant funds goes towards promotion and tenure. And so that was kind of my hook. Like, I know the faculty are invested in student learning and student success, but also there is competing interest and for their time and attention and resources. And so that was kind of my segue into the work that I'm doing on my campus, and working with ORSP, and having one of the associate vice presidents kind of get behind open education resources was also a significant kind of momentum push. Anytime that you can get administrators involved and engaged in the work that you're doing, and try and make them see how there's synergy between their outlined priorities for the university and the goals that you're trying to accomplish for your OER program, then you can get a lot more support on campus that way. But when thinking about scaling, I would say it was definitely thinking about maintaining my sanity and my workload balance. So trying to develop and cultivate these partnerships has really been a successful strategy. So that kind of cultivated our dovetailed into a relationship with the Department for Center for Teaching and Learning, and training other faculty who have then adopted OERs into their course, because they might do it on an individual basis. But I found that faculty are sometimes a little hesitant about sharing some of their success or some of their projects, just in case it doesn't necessarily work out for their faculty, for their fellow faculty members, or they're a little bit shy for whatever reason about sharing it, but trying to train them and make them more comfortable with sharing their experience and their progress with open education resources, and help increase adoption in their particular units, academic units on campus in their departments. So that's been one of the ways I've had a little bit more success scaling. I'm now working with the bookstore, and they were one of my early partners, but we're trying to really expand the way that we work to increase exposure, because I still feel like many of you mentioned that educational component, trying to find out exactly how much faculty know about open education resources, their understanding of what is actually open and what that means is still not where I would like it to be. So there's that big educational component. And then they're also not necessarily sure where to look, even if they are invested or wanting to find it. And again, I'm one person. So I have also kind of brought my fellow liaison librarians along and kind of indoctrinated them into this work as well. So it has been a kind of more like a guerrilla recruitment scaling process for me, just trying to get folks on board with the OER mission.
All right, so I'll finish up here. So my initiatives are pretty different than everyone else's. I work at a system office, and we have 13 community colleges in Colorado. And all of our colleges are really different. You know, we've got metro colleges, we've got rural colleges, all different sizes of budgets and different sizes of staff. And so it's challenging when it comes to looking at projects because they need to kind of adapt and they need to kind of do all things for all colleges, if you will. And so you can't just come up with a project and assume that it'll work for all 13 colleges. It needs to basically, it needs to work for everyone while respecting the autonomy of each of the colleges. And so with that in mind, we try to create projects at the community college system that allow for adaptability, which I guess is one of the tenets of OER, right? So instead of creating courses with faculty to adopt that just come with the return on investment for student savings, what we do is try to create projects that help support our librarians and instructional designers in e-learning texts to create their own OER programs or to enhance their own OER programs at our colleges in our state. So for the cookbook, we wrote a chapter on a curation program. And that curation program is something that we scaled out that really can be used by any institution in the state of Colorado because we focused it on a statewide program focusing on our guarantee transfer courses. So it's challenging because there's really no such thing as a program that's too big when you're talking about a system that touches 35 locations. But there is such a thing as too much, right? You know, too many mandates, too much pushing, too much. And so that's kind of where our struggle is maintaining the autonomy of our colleges and being there as a support as opposed to a mandate. And so with our top 40 project, we were very intentional with the courses that we selected. We looked at the top enrollment across our system, selected those courses, and did a curation project where we looked for all of the available OER for those courses that would benefit all of our colleges. We created curation guides and then we just made them available. There was no requirement to use the curation guides, to create OER courses, but it was really just kind of that first step to support the colleges, either use it to enhance or it can be the program. And that's because we have colleges that are all over the gamut, you know, creating Z degrees as well as just getting started. So it's challenging to try to be all things for all institutions. Yeah, I think I'll leave it there.
Well, thank you all. One of the things that Emily and I love about being at Minds is that we're specialized, but we're sort of in the middle and we aspire. And so it's wonderful to hear things from big institutions and little institutions and different institutions and to learn from such a wide variety of colleagues. Our next question is, if you could tell us maybe one lesson that you've learned or an aspect of your project that now you're sort of in hindsight that you might have changed.
I can start there. I have an easy one. So we selected 40 courses that we were going to make curation guides for. And one thing that in hindsight, you know, the upkeep of these projects. So with my specific project, we selected 40 courses and we just thought, oh, well, when we redesign these courses, we'll just update the curation guides. But we didn't really take into account how quick the landscape changes. And CJ, like you, I'm a solo librarian or a solo OER person doing the work. And so therefore, when folks are using our curation guides, they keep sending me resources to update and to do my job and to manage all these projects and then update guides is just a lot. So I think being realistic about what the project actually entails after it's over is something I would have done different.
So I am also a solo person. And for me, one of the biggest lessons that I learned is how important partnerships are. So it's kind of echoing what CJ said earlier, that when we first started this project, it was me and one partner from our university college. And he is also my co-author on our chapter, by the way. And we really needed more partners than we had to get this going. So we ended up having to work with our liaison librarians. We ended up having to work with ORSP. We've ended up needing our marketing and communications folks just to help us let people know that we're actually doing something. So cultivating those partnerships with our faculty, with our administrators, with our librarians has been really important. And I wish that was something that we had started earlier.
Just did on what Jenelys just said. If anything, I would have asked for help sooner. Just tried to get that partnership going a lot sooner, because I remember the really bleak days when I was just going it alone and doing workshops and just even trying to get the word out and get attendance up and just increase the level of information that's out there. It's challenging when you have so many different units on campus and you're only one person you don't necessarily know the best avenues and the right way to spread your message. And so when you do have that level of support, you just get insight from different folks about how this department operates versus how this department operates. So it's really helpful.
I think that was, sort of one of our biggest challenges too, was, communicating our efforts and what we've done so far. I think that's one thing we could have done better. I know, like, especially our public facing statement of OA support, we were really intending that to be sort of a conversation piece that would, get faculty to think about what we're currently supporting and be able to sort of offer suggestions for things that they would like to see the library support. And that piece hasn't really come about too much yet. I know that individual liaisons have conversations with individual faculty all the time about these things, but to have more of a systematic engagement, I think, with faculty and other, OA advocates on campus would be good.
Yeah, thank you. I think we could probably do a whole other presentation, like the cookbook take 2, what we learned, what we wish we would have done differently, because I know I have a lot to share there. And I agree with all of that. I mean, the communication, sustainability, the upkeep, the partnerships, all things I wish I would have thought of a lot more in hindsight with the different projects we've been doing at Minds. So as our next question, we wanted to ask what suggestions you may have, thinking about how your project's gone, what suggestions you have for either scaling up or down, your projects to fit your institutional needs.
I can go first on this one, I guess. So for our project, I would say it was fairly broad in scope and large, and we conducted this work through a working group that included librarians from our scholarly publishing team and from our department's financial officer and our AUL and things like that. We had a lot of people involved, and so we were able to meet regularly to go over budget documents and categorize things and make recommendations for future directions. And I imagine that in many libraries this would be the work that would be done by an individual, and so I would say scaling down might be necessary in a lot of contexts for this type of project. And I would say in that case, you could focus on, assessing a single type of open access infrastructure, like you could look just at agreements that you have with open access publishers, or, are you supporting SCOS or, DOAJ or anything like that, those types of things. You might decide to focus on a particular college or department or discipline rather than, looking at your entire university or college. In terms of scaling up, I think we have sort of thought about scaling up a bit. And I think scaling up for this type of project would look like, I think, even more advocacy for purchase of OA infrastructure, just more. I think there are more services and resources that we could put our weight behind, that we could advocate for. And I think that the system that we've set up kind of lends itself well for that.
I can go next. For us, everything that we've done has really started very library centric and then needed to grow outward from there. So I would say that if you're in kind of a similar boat to that, you're starting really very much in the library and then needing to branch out, needing to build those connections, that starting small is a really great way to go. You can run pilot projects. Pilots are amazing things. And there's a very small risk when you're doing failure on that level. If you start out with something where you're investing tons of money and your administration is behind it and that doesn't work, you're going to have a lot harder time getting a foothold later on than if you start small and you build into something that your administration can get behind. For us, that has been very much along the lines of starting with a small bit of education, reaching out to specific groups, specific faculty members, working our way towards the administration, but then also allowing it to branch out into different types of programs. So I might be starting with copyright education, but I might end up talking to somebody about the open access journal that they've always wanted to publish. Or I might be starting out with saying, hey, did you know about this thing called Creative Commons licensing? And ending up with, oh, I can make OER for my class. So working through not only the needs of individuals, but then branching those out and seeing how many other people there are on your campus who have that similar need and grow that way.
So I think it's critical to pick something that's manageable. Not only am I the only person who is involved really in OER, but I'm also literally a solo librarian. And I think that especially recently, we need to focus more on what's realistic in terms of workload, in terms of work-life balance, in terms of our sanity. When we're talking about something like OER and we know the effect, the positive impact that it can have on students, in terms of finishing coursework, degrees, retention, the return, I think that at least me, I don't want to speak for everyone, but at least I have a tendency to overcommit. I'm willing to work way more than I should to try to get something done because I know how good it is and how much it will benefit students. But that comes at a detriment to myself. And so I think that when it comes to scaling a project to fit an institutional need, it's also really critical that we scale a project to fit our own needs. We can't just say yes to everything because we want to. We need to make sure that it's something that we can fit in our own workload, especially if you don't have anyone that you can help with. So with my project, I said yes, but I also put in a budget for 4 contract librarians to do the work for me, and I managed the project. Because if that wasn't the case, then I would have picked 5 courses to do instead of 40. And so I think that not only with these projects, but I just think in general, it's really important that we look at ourselves and our work and what's actually realistic, and pick something that's manageable. And it's okay to say no, or not now, or not that much. But I know that's also a lot easier said than done. But in all fairness, I'm not tenured and I work in a community college. And so I know that things are different everywhere. But I just think that that's important.
Great, thank you all. Brittany, I think I'm gonna revisit that recording whenever I find myself overcommitting to the next thing and revisit that.
Just text me, I'll be your cheerleader.
Okay.
Did I freeze?
No, I think Emily froze.
Okay.
We broke Emily.
Okay, Emily, I broke you.
Okay.
She's saying no right now.
Yeah, that
Good
just
job,
hurt.
Emily.
Done. The webinar was just too much.
Yep, that's her point this week, Monday afternoon. So while we wait for Emily to come back, you've already already all given us some really, really good advice. But I know that some people listening today are either very new to OA and OER, or maybe thinking about starting new projects or initiatives after they read all the incredible work that you've done in the cookbook. So could you give us one piece of advice for librarians who are starting a new project or initiative?
I would say use existing relationships. If you're thinking about starting now, before you venture out, try and think about projects that are already in the works or initiatives that are already happening on campus, and see how you can participate in their project and go ahead and add on open education resources or OERs into the mix. Because there's already probably a project on campus that has a lot of momentum, a lot of administrative support. And if you can kind of make the stakeholders there see the synergy between what your goals are and what they're trying to accomplish, then you've got that built-in support system. So maybe try and look for the low-hanging fruit that's already there.
I would add to that, in these spaces of open educational resources and open access, it seems to be the community values align a lot with sharing and, helping people. And, it's been great for both our OER initiative and our OA initiatives to look at what other people have done in other institutions and see, oh, this might work for us, this might not. And it seems like people are very willing to share, any information about their processes, outcomes, and things like that. And so I would just encourage people to reach out beyond your own university too.
I would say that one of the main things to look at is what is the actual need in your institution, because I can sit here all day long and say, open access is great, open educational resources are amazing, but if I don't make it relevant to anybody, they're not going to care. So take a look around, see what's the awareness around you? What's the receptiveness around you? What is something on your campus that you can help make better with OER or OA, and approach people in that way rather than just doing, hey, it's open access week and everybody should love us because we're librarians who do open access. Go to them and say, hey, I've noticed that your department has this whole collection of materials that isn't getting shared. Can we help you with that? You have been struggling lately with, making your online presence look uniform. How can we help you with that? You are really sick of using this same textbook that you've been doing for the same 12 years, and you hate this chapter and you really want that chapter. Can we help you remix something that's more worthwhile to you? So look for needs and try to address those rather than just going out and standing on an OA soapbox. That would be my suggestion.
And I would also focus on what's important maybe to your leadership. I know that we all can list off 100 reasons why open access and open educational resources are beneficial, right, to faculty and to students and to staff. But what might be most important and might get the most buy-in from your administration may just be a return on investment in student savings. And if that might not be the most important thing to us, but if that's what's most important to your leadership, write the report, brag about the numbers, and let them do the good PR stuff, and then you can focus on all the other stuff. But being, upset, if you will, that, we're not focusing on the open pedagogy, because that's the most important thing. When leadership cares about the return on investment, I mean, at some point to get started, focus on what leadership wants, because they're the ones who are giving us the money to do these things most of the time. And they're the ones that we need to make happy. And, we can talk about both then. And once you get their support, then you can talk about the other great benefits. But sometimes you got to play the politics to get the support, even if it is kind of a pain.
Thank you all. Oh, CJ, sorry, I didn't mean to
I was just
go ahead.
The politics piece does seem to be very important. And in my particular focus, OER's open education resources, there's competition between who gets awarded what funds based on how many seats you can fill and student enrollment. And so one of my just really easy hooks is like, hey, we see that there's evidence that students who don't have to pay for textbooks in these classes tend to stick around longer, and they will actually literally pick your class because they don't have to pay for a textbook. So just, I mean, it may seem like it's not the thing that you really want to lead with, right? That's not the thing we're most passionate about, but if that's the thing that actually kind of is the hook that gets them invested in OERs, and then you kind of slowly introduce them to all the other pedagogical opportunities that are available, just go with the low-hanging fruit just to get your foot in the door.
Thank you all. And sorry for my computer going on the fritz there for a second. I've only been doing the Zoom stuff for like a year and a half, still figuring it out. So we'll finish off with one last question from us and then open it all to you for your questions. So feel free to add those into the chat, and Brianna and I will take a look through and be sure to ask our panelists the questions. But one last question for our panelists. Where do you see your project going from here? Like next steps, scaling differently, wherever you see your projects going?
Start, because I'm like super excited about something that's happening right now. So one of my early partnerships was the bookstore, and just trying to kind of do, again, that like guerrilla marketing, showing students that, hey, the library maybe has an e-copy of this book available. It might be a later edition or something like that, just letting students know what their options are and talking to faculty. And so one of the things that came out of that partnership is a conversation about making sure students have equitable access on the first day of class. And so the bookstore has their own separate project that they're doing, but one of the things we're working on is developing an interface that when faculty purchase their books from the bookstore, they will see also all of the other options that faculty who are teaching the same course resources that they're using. So if somebody else has adopted an OER textbook, that will show up and say, hey, did you know that there was this free resource that you can also use to teach your course? Or there is this library provided resource that is free to your students that you can also use and other faculty members are using. So that's one way for me to increase my impact and exposure and not even have to physically be present or do anything other than the algorithm. So I'm really excited about that partnership with the bookstore.
So we are having some discussions right now about being more strategic and centralizing where we can with some of our OER work. I think I alluded to earlier, you know, some of our colleges have more support for OER efforts, and some of our colleges have less financial support, less staff support. So we're trying to be strategic in centralizing some of that to support our under-resourced colleges, while leaving room for autonomy in our colleges. So those conversations are exciting, and we'll see what happens from there. But we're looking at trying to default to OER in our online courses, and that's really not part of this project, but it is something that I'm very excited about in the community college system.
I think our big goal for our project is that it will lead to kind of a broader, more full range of OA infrastructure support at our institution. So rather than just having most of our funding that's been earmarked for OA going to, you know, pay APCs to big publishers, I'm hoping that we have a broad range of OA infrastructure that's in alignment with our institutional values. And so I think, you know, we've been able to successfully use our new workflow to kind of advocate for some, you know, new services, interdisciplinary supports that would affect, you know, multiple colleges and departments at the institution. And I hope, you know, eventually we'll be able to get to the point where we're sort of regularly investing in sort of community-oriented open access infrastructure.
For us, we're aiming for slow growth. Make sure that it's not overstretching the resources that we have, because just one of me. I cannot handle if suddenly we have an explosion and all of our faculty are like, open access is the best, take all of our things. I don't know what world that would be, but you know. So hopefully aiming for a more cohesive approach as well. So right now we have, like I mentioned at the very beginning, a number of projects that are aiming towards different facets. They're different entry points for our community. But coordinating that into a more overarching research lifecycle support system, research information management system, not the technical kind of system, but the project kind of system, so that we have open access and OER and the repository and collections development and our liaison librarians all working together in a way where we can disseminate information appropriately and we can hear about it when somebody has something that they need to do, you know? So really fostering those connections, fostering those partnerships, and making something that is cohesive and workable enough for our administration to also want to invest in it.
Thanks, Jenelys and everyone. Yeah, it's really interesting to hear about where these are all going to go. And I can't wait to, see what else everyone publishes and shares in the future. I'm going to follow you all along at conferences and make sure I get to hear about what's going on. So we'll start with some questions from our attendees, but first I just want to give a shout out. I'm looking through these attendees and Brianna noticed that we have so many other of our authors for the cookbook in attendance, and just want to give you all a shout out and let everyone know that we really have so many. This is just 4 of our fantastic authors, but we've got so many really cool projects we've highlighted in the book. So really encourage you to take a look through. As you can see, we've got some, as you can see with these 4 panelists, we've got some really cool stuff going on in the book. So please take a look through that. And it looks like, Jenelys, we have a question for you from Iris. And she was wondering, how do you get into classes to view the faculty needs, and how do you know what OER they're using? And Brittany, and even CJ, I think maybe thinking of your projects, you may have some advice also to get there. But yeah, Jenelys, if you want to kick that off.
So first and foremost, by fostering partnerships. So for me, the biggest and greatest into faculty classrooms is through our instructional designers. That is an invaluable relationship because they can tell you what the faculty are using, they can tell you what the faculty are lacking, and oftentimes they have great ideas already of where to find things on right topics. So working with them can be a huge benefit. Another way to go about that is by just getting to know your faculty. I have a lot of faculty who I've known for quite a few years now, and if you're on their good side, they will tell you about their pain points. And with the expectation a lot of times that you can help them solve those pain points, which is not entirely accurate at all times. But if you can build that kind of a relationship with them, let them know in case A, I've been able to help you with this thing in the past, so you can ask me about this thing in the future. And if I had, say, a great suggestion for them on a textbook in the past, they can come to me and say, oh, well, what if I want to do something in a way that I can put online? Okay, well, let's work on that. So really, it is all about fostering relationships.
All right, thank you, Jenelys. And we have another question from Jacqueline. Let me just do that. So really for pretty much everyone here, what advice do you have for getting started with OA and OER materials and faculty? I'm at a small university, FTE just over 3,000, where I'm one of 2 full-time librarians. So really getting your program started.
Well, I wrote a comment in the chat, but I always think that a great way to start an OER program is to start with like the library champion faculty. You know, the ones who are like constantly coming to the library, who want information literacy sessions or always popping in. I feel like those faculty are always the most receptive to suggestions or ideas that we have to offer. And so, especially if they're in an area where there's already some great OER textbooks, you know, you can say, hey, you know, here are some options. I was thinking, you know, are you interested or open to this idea? If you start with just one or two people, it may go well. They may not be into it, but you know, at least you know that they are someone who's open to the idea. It's not like you're working with someone who, you know, is afraid of the library. It also won't stretch your bandwidth too much if they're already coming to the library often and you're working with them already. But I'm sure that there's other folks here who have some great ideas.
Yeah, I think that's really a great point. Jacqueline, I think she made that comment in the chat, which is why sometimes I'll come across a really great resource or have a suggestion or recommendation. But if I do it, it's kind of like cold calling. So I will ask their liaison or the subject librarian that they're usually talking to or most engaged with, like, hey, I saw this really great thing and I think this would be perfect for your faculty. If you could start a conversation or just send that on to them. But in a smaller library or campus, you probably know all the faculty and you are their librarian. So that's a great starting point. You kind of already have that inside track with them.
I'd say to build off of what CJ said, once you know of one or two faculty who are using OER, you know, you can always kind of put the bug in their ear that they can approach other faculty in their department. You know, they can present at, you know, faculty meetings, they can invite you to faculty meetings, you know, trying to get invitations, I think, to department meetings is a good way to go sometimes, especially if it's like they're talking about curriculum or they're talking about a particular textbook for a class. You know, it's a great way to kind of get your foot in the door.
And I guess just one little tiny tag on at the end is when you're working with your faculty, especially ones who aren't familiar with OER to start with, let them know that these things are vetted. Let them know that they've been peer reviewed, that they're not just internet books. You know, that's all.
I'm sorry, let me just go back. I saw an earlier question or somebody asked it and I wasn't firing on all cylinders. But the question about how do you see what faculty are using in their courses or in their textbooks? If you have a bookstore that can access that information and that will give you that information, a lot of faculty will report in what they are requiring for their class, even if it's low cost or no cost. They will report that to the bookstore, and our bookstore will actually purchase like a few of those OpenStax textbooks just because students still like to have the tactile feel and have those physical copies. So that's one way I get insight. And if you use a learning management system, we use a syllabus template now that you have to, our administration requires that you put in your required text, and instruction designers, I think was mentioned. Someone can run a report on what's in that field. And that is a great way to get all of that data.
Wow, CJ, that's a great piece of advice. I definitely want to have, I'm going to go, you know, ask my instructional designers today what they can gather for me. All right, well, thank you all. We have probably time for one more question if someone wanted to pop that into chat, but really do want to thank you all for participating today, sharing your insight, sharing your lessons learned. I think that, you know, we all feel very empowered to go out and scale a project to our needs right now. It's a great way to kick off Open Access Week. So thank you all for attending. Please check out the cookbook. So many great recipes on different projects that you can adopt for your institution on all things related to scholarly communications. Thanks. We just got the link in the chat there for the cookbook.
All right, thank you all again for a great presentation, and I will be stopping the recording now. So it looks like we have no more questions coming in.